Thank you, guys. Thank you very much for being so kind with the introduction. Today, I'm going to be talking about how to speed up build times in the Jamstack with DPR in Next.js. If you've heard about Jamstack before, can you wave your hand? You have? Awesome. Have you heard about DPR? No? What about Next.js? Do we know what that is? Awesome. That makes my job easier today. So today I'll be talking about how to speed up build times in the Jamstack with distributed persistent rendering in a Next.js application. Like the host rightly said, my name is Kenny. I work for Netifly as a developer experience engineer. And this is my team. This is the DX team in Netifly. If you're wondering which of these fine faces is mine, I'm the one with the dancing corgi on my head. So I have a YouTube channel where I talk about the Jamstack and Vue and Nux and all the things that I care about and all the tools that I like. You can check it out. My YouTube channel is Ekene Eze. In my team, we have a platform called Jamstack Explorers, where we make content for people who are interested in the Jamstack or who want to learn about the Jamstack. There's tons of resources there: Next.js, Sanity, CMSs, all the static site generators you care about, you'll find them there. We also have a remotely interesting podcast, no pun intended. It's a really fun podcast that I think you will find remotely interesting. All right, that's all about the things I do for work. What I really want to do at the end of the day is learn how to get all my friends drunk at home for no reason at all. I want to be a mixologist at some point. And the reason why that is I have an uncle back in Nigeria. When I was growing up, he was a bartender, and he always made these stories about how he is the happiness bringer. I used to wonder what that is, but he would say that people walks into his bar really sad and angry about life and frustrated and all of that, and then they leave the bar very happy and shouting at the top of their voices and dancing and all of that. So it got me really happy, so that one day in school, I was really small. My teacher asked me, what do I want to be when I grow up? I said, I want to be a happiness bringer. And in my head, it meant I have to get people drunk so that they can forget their problems and all of that. So it occurred to me that that was the first time I had to answer the question of, what do I want to be when I grow up? So at the end of the day, I still want to be a mixologist. I want to learn how to mix drinks and get people happy so that they can forget their sorrows for a while. Once again, Ekene Eze is my name, DX at Netifly. And what you will learn today is, number one, you will learn what exactly the term Jamstack is. And then you will understand what the word DPR is and the problem it solves. It's a short term for distributed persistent rendering, and I'm sure by the end of the day you will understand more what that is and what problems it tries to solve. You will also see how to use DPR in a Next.js application. One good thing about DPR is that it is framework agnostic, so you can use it wherever you want in any framework that you want. But for the purposes of this session, I'm going to be using it with Next.js. And you will also learn how to build faster Jamstack sites, which is why I'm here today to talk to you and hope to share what I know with you. And then you will see me struggle with a demo that I made that I hope will work, or we'll find out. So what is the Jamstack? I'm sure if you go to the link on the slide, you will find out that the definition you'll find there is Jamstack is a way of thinking about building the web where the UI is compiled, the front end is decoupled, and data is pulled in as it is needed. Now, that is not very helpful to me when I was looking at it the first time, and I'm not sure if just reading this definition helps you understand what it is, which is why I want to go a step further and try and take down these 3 points and just tell you exactly what they mean. So when you hear the UI is compiled, what it really means is it has a build process that pre-generates the markup of the site in advance. That's it. the UI is compiled is a good way to put it, but I prefer the second one. Now, the front end is decoupled. A good example to help you understand this is, take for instance, a Node.js application that has an EJS template. If you're building that kind of application, they are tightly coupled together. So when you deploy your Node app, it deploys with the EJS template, and there's no separation of concerns there. You can't decouple them. But if you're building the Jamstack way, you have that opportunity to keep your backend layer separate and completely independent of your front-end layer. Data is pulled in as needed simply means that data fetching should happen mostly at build time, right? If you have to pull in data for your site, let it happen mostly at build time. But if you need to also fetch data on request, that's also available to you. So in summary, what I would say, if you ask me again after this conference how I define the Jamstack or what it is, I will say the same 3 points that I just said. It has a build process that compiles the site into pre-generated HTML in advance. The front end is decoupled from the backend layers and services, and data fetching happens mostly when the site is building, and also happens at request time when the users are using it. So I hope that gives you kind of like a good understanding of what the Jamstack is. And what are the benefits? Why are we even thinking about building the Jamstack way in the first place? One of the benefits, and the one that I think comes out the most, is the fact that your site is faster and your users are happy, right? If you build a site where all the content of your site is pre-generated and they are available on the site even before the users get there, it means that your site is super fast, and search engines are your friends. They will be happy because they can crawl your site and index it properly. If you want to scale, you really all need to just deploy your site in different edge nodes in different places, and automatically you'll have more users accessing your site as easily as 1 second. So security, developer experience, and so on are all also the benefits of building the Jamstack way, as we will see later in the session. So if it's all well and good and it's all roses, so what then is the problem? Why are we even talking about optimizing it further? Can anybody tell me what the problem could possibly be? I think I've been singing a lot of praises for the Jamstack, but what then is the problem? Well, there's not really a problem as much as it is a trade-off. And that is that for very large sites on the Jamstack, the build times can get incredibly high, right? And it is more obvious when you're building enterprise-size applications, right? Ordinarily and usually, people will put on their blog and their personal sites and their portfolio sites, build it the Jamstack way, pre-generate everything, and then deploy it. But if you're building really large sites that have like 10,000, 20,000 pages, you see that the time it takes for the site to build when you deploy it will get considerably high. And that is what I'm trying to show you, techniques that you can use and make that process faster for yourself. Now, I need you to pay attention on this one, right? Consider a site that has 3 sections, right? I call it a local news website or anything else. It has a headline section where all your breaking news should be displayed, right? And then it has an archive section where maybe news from 2 years ago are all there. And then you have like a blog post session where people can go and read blog posts about your site or what you're doing. Now, for instance, if you have 200 headlines, which are like breaking news that are hot out of the market, everybody wants to read it, and you have like 2,500 archived pages that not many people care about at the moment, and also maybe 1,000 blog pages. When you deploy this site, of course it is a Jamstack site, so ideally what will happen is that your build process will kick off, and it will pre-generate all 3,700 pages of your site before users can access it, right? Now, if that is the case, take for instance that it takes your build process 1 second to generate 1 page. and you have 3,700 pages in your site. That means your site is going to build for 3,700 seconds. That is hypothetically speaking. That's not the math. Static site generators are much, much faster than that. But that means if this is the case, you can see how building your site the Jamstack way can kind of impact your user's experience at the end of the day. So you have a very small site, you have headlines, you have archive sections, you have blog post sections, but for the site to build, you have to wait for like an hour plus, and that is not very helpful. So, and that's not all. Something else that jumps at me when I'm talking about Jamstack and the Jamstack sites and the Jamstack way of building the web is not just the fact that you have to pre-generate all your sites at build time. It's also that if you make subsequent updates to the site, the entire build process is going to run again. Because we're doing the Jamstack way, right? We want content to be generated and ready for your users before they request for it. So in this case, in my example of having a local news website, imagine that as we're here, you have 200 pages of hot news headlines that are on your website. And then something happens immediately. Maybe a speaker says something really funny and you want to capture it in your headlines. If you push that update and add content to your headlines section of your page, of your site, what will happen is the entire 3,700 pages will get regenerated again. And we don't want that, right? It's just not cool. I'd rather the section that I updated gets regenerated. Over the years, there's been some innovations and popular solutions that have come up in the community trying to solve the problem of lengthy build times in the Jamstack. Some of the ones that are popular is incremental builds by Gatsby. It gives you a way to pre-generate only the section of your site that changes, right? Say, for instance, I sent a new page, or I made a new page in my headline section. Every other part of my application will stay as it is, and only the headlines get generated again. The problem with that is it doesn't help you with the initial build, right? For instance, if I just finished building my application and I'm deploying it, and it's like 5,000 pages, incremental builds don't help you until you get to the point where you update. So I have to wait for that period of time to generate all the site contents the first time. Another one is ISR, incremental static regeneration. If you like Next.js, that will be very popular, and you probably know how to use that. But it also has its trade-offs in the sense that somehow it breaks some of the core principles of the Jamstack, like atomic and immutable deploys, and also it is just framework specific, right? It's just you only have access to ISR if you're working with Next.js. There's another popular approach that I once talked about on my YouTube channel called sharding. It's a way to split different parts of your sites into microsites that are then connected together using proxies and redirects. The issue with that I found in my own experience is that it requires you to do a lot of configurations to know how you're redirecting your sites from one part to the other, and that can get confusing sometimes. So the solution that I'm going to be talking about today is DPR, which is short for Distributed Persistent Rendering. I'm sure if you Google it, you will also find an enormous description of what the definition is. But in my own understanding, it is just a new approach that encourages you to split your site into two different components, a critical part and a deferred part. What happens is you can then have the opportunity to tell your build process that I only want my critical site to be generated at build time. Everything else can happen when the users request for them. So if that is the case, and I've built my Next.js news application that way, it means that I can tell my build process that when you're pre-generating this site, I only want the headlines pre-generated because that's what users want to see, right? Once they come on the site, that's the first content I want them to interact with. Everything else can wait until the users asks for them. So that's what DPR is trying to do. But before we proceed, I'd like to just call your attention back to the two overheads that we're trying to solve for. The first one is lengthy build times for large sites, and then also lengthy build times when the site updates. So what is DPR offering? How is distributed persistent rendering trying to solve this problem? I think I kind of just skimmed through it, but take, for instance, if I go back to my news site example, you'll find that I have just about 200 headlines in my news site that people really want to read breaking news. That's what I want to show them when they come to the site. But then I also have 2,700 archived pages and 1,000 pages of blog posts that people really don't want to interact with at the time that they come onto the site. So I don't have to build that site every time I make a new change or I deploy my site. So DPR will help us see how we'll just limit the sites that we generate at build time and when the site rebuilds to just the critical parts of the site that we need. Now, a good question would be, what then happens to the deferred pages, right? Because, of course, you want your content to continue to be available to your users, right? It's OK that I want to show you only the headlines, but what if a user has a URL that links to an archived blog post or an archived news, and they want to read it nonetheless? So what DPR does is, when you request for a deferred page, it uses a special type of serverless function called on-demand builders that we'll see later in the session to go ahead and pre-generate that page, put it into the CDN, and serve it to your user. So every deferred page will still be generated when the users request for them, but then it's put in the cache, and subsequently, that function doesn't have to run at all. Great. So how is this different from what we've seen in the past, like incremental static regeneration and incremental builds and all the shardings and all the examples I mentioned were popular in the ecosystem? Number one is it improves build times for your sites, not just at request time, not just when the site is being updated, but also when the site is being built the first time. Like if you deploy your site the first time, it helps you overcome the lengthy build times. The second one is it doesn't break any core Jamstack principles, right? You can still hold atomic deploys, immutable deploys, rollbacks, and all that good stuff without compromising on any of that. Then it is also framework agnostic. So even though I'm using it with Next.js in this session, but if you wanted, you can use it with 11t and really any other framework that you care about. All right, so how would this impact the current example that I've been talking about? Let's see. Now, I may have mentioned this before, but imagine a situation where if you update one part of your application, no matter how small that part is, your entire site has to rebuild. Now, rebuilding sites that take a lot of time is expensive, right? Because your hosting provider will charge you based on your build minutes. And if your site is taking a lot of time to build, it increases cost and all of that, right? So we don't want that. So in this case, if you use DPR, for instance, to generate your headlines when you're building your news site or really any other site, what happens is that part of your application gets generated, put into the CDN, and is ready by default. Whenever a user comes there, they will get access to the content. They don't have to do any network calls at all. What that will mean in our case is when I deploy this site the next time, as opposed to building 3,700 pages, I would only have to build 200 pages, right? And that would be like, if my hypothetical mass is anything to go by, that would give us a 94.6% reduction in build time out of the box, right? Because now I'm deferring all the pages that I don't immediately care about, like the archived pages and the blog pages, and just generating my headlines. So how does this happen? Earlier, I mentioned the DPR idea is brought to life by a special type of serverless functions that we call on-demand builders. They are really the workers that make DPR a reality. Now, if you've ever used serverless functions before, this will not be new to you. When I show what an on-demand builder looks like, it will make sense to you. But what they really do is, as opposed to fetching data on request time, if you use ODB and you make a network call, it will fetch that data, put it in the CDN, cache it there, and then return it to the user. What it means is, if you make subsequent requests to the same path or to the same route, there's no network call happening anymore. The on-demand builder has done it, cached it for you, and then just be serving you static assets. So let's see what an on-demand builder looks like. Like I said, it's just a regular serverless function. There's nothing new, nothing that jumps at you, I think. But it's just you import the builder package from Netifly functions and you wrap it around your serverless function, and that's it. A more helpful example, I think, would be this one, right? What happens is, if you have configured your site with redirects to call this function when you want to generate an ODB page, what happens is the on-demand builder would find the path that you want to generate, go ahead and do all the work about generating the path, put it in the cache, and then send it back to the user. So what makes an on-demand builder? Like I said, what we saw before is just without the two lines that are highlighted, without line 4 and line 25, it's a proper serverless function, right? The only thing that makes this an on-demand builder is the fact that we are wrapping it with the builder package that we imported from Netifly functions, and then we are just using that package to wrap this builder, to wrap this function. All right, so I've been talking about on-demand builders and how they are framework agnostic and all the things they do for you behind the scenes. But how do you actually use it in a Next.js application on Netifly, right? If you've ever deployed a Next.js application on Netifly, you will realize that if you go to the Projects tab and switch over to the Plugins section, you will have this essential Next.js plugin installed for you by default. This is the plugin that hooks into the existing Next.js features to give you the ODB capabilities that does all the cool things that we're talking about. So if you ever have a Next.js application deployed on Netifly, this plugin will be automatically installed for you, and that is what gives you access to on-demand builders so that you can build with DPR. Now, if you're writing a regular Next.js application and you have dynamic paths that you are generating at build time, you will use the getStaticPaths function that runs at build time to generate the paths of your application that you want to be available, right? In this example, I'm trying to generate 3 news items right now. The first one, the second one, and the third one. And I'm doing it using their IDs. What this means is that when I build this site and I deploy it, if I go to my site /news/1, I will get the content. It will already be generated while the site was building. The same will happen when I go to /2 or /3. So these 3 items that I've pre-generated at build time will be available by default when my site is loaded. So that is the default Next.js functionality, because I have the fallback value set to false. So if I go to news/5 or 6 or 7 or any part that wasn't pre-generated, it will error out, right? I will get a 404 page because the resource doesn't exist. It wasn't pre-generated, and the fallback value is false, so it's not doing anything behind the scenes. But how the on-demand builder will work when you're using Next.js on Netifly is, if you set the value of fallback to true, it will kick off an on-demand builder that will go ahead and generate any part that wasn't pre-generated, right? So at this point, I only generated the first part, the second, and the third. So if I go to news/4 or 5 or 6, the on-demand builder will go ahead, pre-generate that page, put it in the CDN, and serve it to the user. Every subsequent request to that part will now be served from the cache and no longer making any more network requests. All right, fingers crossed. I did this demo that may or may not work, but I'm going to try it anyway and show you all what I wanted to do. Okay, so this is the demo that I made. It's exactly what I was talking about, a local news website that will show you all the news items. If you look at the first three, you see that it has a breaking news tag, the first three, because those are the ones that I pre-generated while this site was building. Everything else in this website will be generated at request time, right? And to see that, I'm going to go ahead and click into one of the news items, and I get my news. And if I come to my functions, I'll go to the on-demand builder function, and you see that my function is running as expected. Now, if I go to the second news item, the page is there. There's no network request happening. It was generated at build time, so we're not making any network calls. And if you look at my function, you will see that there's no network calls happening from this point downwards, right? But what happens if I go to a page that wasn't pre-generated? Say, for instance, I go to the 5th page. Now, what's going on under the scenes is that the on-demand builder will go ahead, pre-generate that page because it doesn't exist at this point. It will pre-generate the page, put it in the cache, and then serve it to the user. Now, if I go back to my function, you will see that it made a network call in news/5. This function calls didn't happen when I was checking the first one and the second one, or even the third one. So this is a very good way to optimize your build times in the Jamstack if you're building with Next.js, or if you're building with 11t, or really any framework or static site generator of your choice. Another good thing, though, is if I do the same thing again, say, for instance, I'm a different user now, and I'm asking for the same exact part, I just ran the function again. If I check the functions tab, you will see that this function did not run again because the resource, the value, has already been generated and put in the cache. So every subsequent request to that particular part that I've generated will now be served from the cache and no longer making any network calls. So that is the small demo that I wanted to show you how to work with Netlify functions, serverless functions, on-demand builders, and DPR to speed up your Jamstack sites when you're working with Next.js. Some of the resources I prepared for this, I think I put the link to the slides on the first slide. I'll still share it again so that if you need any of these resources, you can go ahead and look them up. I made an on-demand builder with Next.js post that is pretty much talking about the same things that I just talked about, building that local news website with the headlines and the archives and the blog posts. It's available on the link that I attached on the slide. The on-demand builder documentation page is also very helpful. It has been very helpful to me while I was playing around with this thing. And I also made a YouTube video that kind of like says the same thing that I'm saying here right now. So it might also be helpful to you if you need to see that in action. So those are all the resources that I have, and I'm right on time. Thank you very much for listening to me talk about the Jamstack and ODB and DPR. I'll be hanging around. If you need to find me, I think I'm going to be very obvious in the crowd. So thank you guys for coming, and thanks for having me.